The Grim Tale of Grace Macabre, Chapter 54. Grace cautiously crawled up into the dark lair. Sarah was right behind her. There was enough space to stand, and they used the light from their phones to look around the room. The walls were made of the strange spider silk twisted through leaves and mud. The lair appeared to be sectioned off into chambers, and there was another opening across from them that led into another room. The floor was littered with dozens of bones. "These are human," Sarah whispered, using her light as she knelt. "And they're too small to be adult." "And there's so many," Grace replied. Sarah somberly scanned the room. "There's too many to account for the kids who have been abducted from Nevermore. His hunting grounds must be bigger than what we thought." Grace grimaced. "Ian said to use a bone from one of its victims to kill it. Any ideas which kind of bone?" Sarah moved her light around as she looked. "Well, a human leg bone is supposed to be the strongest bone in the body. Help me find one, preferably a femur." "But those are blunt on both ends," Grace said. "How are we supposed to stab the crawling man with one of those? We need something sharp, don't we?" Sarah frowned. "I don't know. Maybe you're right. It makes sense that it would need to be sharp and strong." She rummaged through the bones that surrounded them, noticing that they were covered in deep scrapes. Clearly, they had been gnawed upon. "What about a rib?" Grace asked. "Those are pointy." After a moment, Sarah found a rib bone that she thought might work. "This is the longest one I can find. It's not very big, and it's more like a dagger. That means you're going to have to get really close." Grace took the rib bone and held it up to her light. The gravity of the moment pressed down on her. This belonged to a small child who had been snatched from his home, dragged back here, and murdered. The child's terror would have been all-consuming. Surrounded by the remains of murdered children, Grace considered the darkness that must have been present the moment when the crawling man made each kill. Not the absence of light, but instead darkness as in the absence of hope, knowing there would be no escape from a gruesome death. But more specifically, the darkness that ruled the heart of the beast as it devoured the innocence that each of these children possessed. And that's when Grace understood everything. She understood with soul-shaking conviction that evil is a real presence, that its malevolent intent is the complete ruination of the innocent. Evil would never be satisfied until it devoured or perverted every good thing that had ever been created, and it set its wicked plan into motion long ago in a perfect garden when an innocent couple fell for the greatest lie ever told. A lie told by a monster whose sole purpose was to taint their innocence. And that desire to taint the innocent is what has driven every monster, whether that monster is human or supernatural, since that terrible moment in that beautiful garden. This profound knowledge washed over her in a massive wave, and she realized this was the same wave from her dreams that had risen above her, teasing that there was some life-changing revelation, only to recede and leave her empty and yearning. But now the wave crashed over her and washed away all remaining doubt. What remained was acceptance, belief, and a calling that emboldened her. And it was strengthened by white, hot, righteous anger. Her new clarity allowed her to see that evil had the ability to manifest itself in myriad ways. It took on any form that would help it corrupt the purity of the innocent. And there seemed to be a quickening to its plan. There were so many school shootings, rapes, murders, abductions, and hate, so many lies, so much pain and destruction, and it seemed fewer people were willing to stand in the face of evil, to draw a line, to fight. She grasped the bone tighter in her hand and made an internal declaration deep in her soul. I will fight. With that declaration came two additional profound revelations. The first concerning the word agape. She could die in this battle against evil. Her willingness to sacrifice herself to save the innocent was the exact definition of agape. The second revelation was concerning the strange word she had seen back at the pit, second setlik. When she had looked upon her rotting corpse in the mirror, she had seen that word scrawled on the wall behind her. More accurately, she had seen the reflection of the word, which meant she was reading it backward. Her terrified, confused mind had not realized that the letters were also backward. When she reflected on the word later, she had missed this important fact. So now she understood that she had not been looking at one strange word, but instead had been looking at the reflection of three words scrawled close together to form a phrase, which was a call to action. Kill the snakes. She intuited that the phrase referred to the runaways, but before she could step into that pit of vipers, she needed to kill the crawling man. He has to be in here, she said. Let's set this thing right. Sarah gave an appreciative nod and followed Grace to the opening leading to the next room. They held out their phones to cast the light beyond them. The crawling man was asleep in this room, sitting in a nest-like structure made of that thick spider silk. He was drawing in long, wheezing breaths and exhaling them in a sickly hiss. He was massive, terrifying, even more so in the squirming shadows caused by the weak cell phone light. There were also two children in the room, one on each side as if standing guard. Their eyes were open, and they were completely black. Sarah glanced at Grace. Fear sweat ran down her face, though her eyes shone with the rush of adrenaline. Sarah could also see her righteous determination and hoped it would be enough to help her win this battle. Suddenly, the crawling man jerked awake, jumped from his nest, and let out an ear-piercing scream. He skittered back on his long, insect-like arms and legs, away from them to the far corner, and turned his eyeless sockets toward them. His long maw opened and closed as he began to whisper something to them. Eat you now or eat you later? Which shall it be? Grace felt her mind go fuzzy and realized the crawling man's mantra was a way to hypnotize his victims. Sarah realized this too. Hurry! Kill him before he has us under his spell, Sarah said. She instinctively dodged to the right, trying to draw the monster's attention toward her. She hoped to give Grace an opening to rush in and stab him with the bone. Suddenly, the two black-eyed children sprang to life, their faces warped into masks of hate. With preternatural speed, they attacked Sarah. Grace moved to help Sarah. "Don't!" Sarah shouted. "I can handle him! Kill him!" Grace rushed in with the bone raised high, ready to strike. The crawling man turned and opened his mouth. A thick rope of that spider webbing shot out from under his tongue and hit Grace's left hand, causing her to drop her phone. The webbing stuck to her hand, fusing her fingers together. She would be unable to effectively use her hand in this battle. He opened his mouth again, ready to shoot another strand at her right hand. Sarah sidestepped the black-eyed children, picked up a skull, and threw it at the crawling man, hitting the side of his head, causing his aim to be off. The new strand of webbing missed Grace by a fraction of an inch. He turned toward Sarah and shot a strand at her, hitting her in the face. Sarah fell, pulling at the webbing, squirming on the ground as she tried to breathe, and the black-eyed children fell upon her and started clawing, punching, and biting. Grace saw her opening when the monster shot his webbing at Sarah. He had turned, exposing his right side. She rushed in and plunged the bone into his neck. He screamed. Then his whisper in her head became louder. This time, however, his mantra was different. "I will eat you now. I will eat you now." Grace felt her mind get more muddled. Her head buzzed. She was getting confused. "I will eat you now." The crawling man swiped at her with one of his long, spindly arms. His claws raked across her chest, cutting 4 gouges that began to seep blood. She was knocked back, and her feet got tangled amongst the bones scattered about the lair. She fell against the wall, but quickly pushed herself back to a standing position. The claw marks on her chest stung. She glanced down and in the wash of the flashlight could see that they didn't seem to be too deep. She shot forward and grabbed at the bone she had stabbed him with and pulled it from his neck. She plunged it down again. He screamed in agony and tried to turn and bite her, but she was too close to him, just behind his spindly arms, out of reach of any bite. She pulled the bone from his neck again and prepared to plunge it down a 3rd time. Just as she was about to, she had the idea that she should stab him at the base of his skull instead. Sever his spinal cord and he won't be able to move, she thought. Due to the webbing that he had sprayed onto her left hand, she couldn't use it to grapple, but she was able to wrap her left arm around his neck, feeling his slick yet leathery skin. She held tight and plunged the bone into the back of his neck at the base of his skull. The crawling man screamed one final time, rearing up on his long spider-like legs, and then collapsed at her feet. He was dead. The black-eyed children were clawing at Sarah, trying to get to her eyes and her throat. They let out long, mournful sighs and collapsed to the bone-scattered floor. They were also dead. Grace rushed over to Sarah, who was still writhing on the ground, struggling to breathe. She used her right hand to tear a piece of shirt from one of the children, then used a cloth to clear the webbing from her hand and Sarah's face. "That was so gross," Sarah said, using the hem of her shirt to wipe her face clean. "Thanks for saving me." "How does that even work?" Grace asked. Sarah gave her a confused look. "What do you mean?" "Well," Grace said, "I just saved your life, but I thought you were already dead." Sarah's eyes shot wide. "Wait a minute. So all this time you thought I was, what, a zombie?" Grace felt sheepish. "Well, aren't you?" "No," Sarah replied. "Not even close." "Then what are you exactly?" Sarah considered the question. I'm not sure. Ghost? Grace asked, eyebrows raised. Sarah was clearly offended and confused at how to answer Grace. Well, I'm not a zombie, and if you ever call me that again... She trailed off, trying to find the right answer. I mean, I have a solid body, which ghosts don't, but I suppose ghost is the closest thing to the truth of what I am. Okay, Grace said. Maybe we can figure all that out later. She walked over and picked up her phone. She looked at the time and gave a weary sigh. Sarah gave a knowing look. Time for the next battle. Yes, it is, Grace said. You look worried, Sarah replied. And I guess you have a right to. Killing this monster, bringing justice for the kids he murdered, is nothing compared to what's about to come. Grace felt anxiety well up inside her. She pushed it down deep. Thanks for the pep talk, Coach. I'm just being honest, Sarah said. You've been tested now, and you now know that you can fight. However, the runaways are going to be nearly impossible to defeat with just the two of us. But I guess if we keep our wits about us, we just might do it. Grace turned her attention to the two dead children. She remembered reading the news article with her uncle at the hospital about the black-eyed children that taunted one of the townsfolk. So, can you explain why their eyes were black? And why he didn't eat them like he did the others? And why they died when I killed him? Sarah shook her head. I'm not completely sure. But it seems that he used some for food and some for protection, I guess. I do know that black eyes are a sign of having a corrupted soul. Grace considered this information for a moment. So what you're saying is that somehow he corrupted the souls of some of these kids and forced them into being his slaves? Sarah shrugged. That seems to be the only answer that makes sense. Ian might be able to get more information from the book I uploaded. Grace found the idea that the crawling man corrupted some kids and used them to do his bidding almost as disturbing as the idea of him eating them for food. Her heart broke for these kids, and she fought back a dark despair. He was so wicked. Sarah nodded. And some of these monsters and people are so much worse. Grace considered this. Am I called to fight them to protect people? Sarah nodded again. Grace turned and began making her way to the entrance of the lair. Then I have to make sure I survive what's next.